Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Today I offer a look at a couple that forever remains on a pedestal in the hearts of Harry Potter fans, James and Lily Potter. These characters have become icons, but is their portrayal always justified? Let's take a fresh perspective on them and try to dispel some myths. Ready? Then let's begin. Number 1, Lily is too perfect. Lily Potter is often portrayed as the ideal character. Beautiful, smart, kind, strong, always ready to lend a helping hand. But it's this idealization that makes her character flat. When a character has too many positive qualities without any flaws, they lose their humanity. Lily essentially has no real defects, which turns her into a cardboard figure rather than a living person. Harry, of course, created an idealized image of his mother, but her perfection is hardly something we can emulate. Number 2, James didn't deserve redemption. In The Order of the Phoenix, Harry learns that his father wasn't the great man everyone thought him to be. James Potter was a bully, and his need for attention and approval from his peers overshadowed his personal qualities. His behavior at school, including bullying Snape, went largely unpunished, and in the end, even Lupin and Sirius justify his actions. But the truth is, James never truly redeemed himself. He didn't take any steps to change his behavior. He simply grew up and moved on without considering the harm he caused his friend. Number 3, Lily and James shouldn't have been together. Lily and James's relationship in school was complicated. Lily couldn't stand Potter's arrogance, his cockiness, and his insolence, and it's hard to believe she could ever fall in love with such a person. The moments when Lily suddenly changed her mind are left unexplained in the books. Many fans believe that Lily and James's love doesn't make sense because their relationship was unhealthy, and perhaps Lily simply let her hidden feelings take over. Number 4, Lily and James are overrated. Although Lily and James receive plenty of praise from the characters who knew them in life, their roles in the story remain very limited. They never fully become characters in the series. Their portrayals are flat and incomplete. Everything we know about the Potters is learned through memories and flashbacks. These two characters didn't show much depth in their storylines, and despite fan adoration, they don't play a significant role in the main plot. Number 5, Lily wasn't kind to Snape. Despite Snape being the one who first insulted Lily, it's hard to ignore that she didn't show much kindness to him either. Snape apologized 1,000 times for his words, but Lily never accepted his apologies. And what's even stranger is that she, without condemning James for his rudeness, eventually marries him. This behavior could be seen as arrogance and a lack of empathy for her friend. Number 6, Lily and James weren't that talented. Lily Potter is described as a genius in potions, but it's worth noting that Snape's techniques aren't that hard to manipulate. Even if Lily was talented, she might have used methods similar to those Harry applied in Half-Blood Prince. James, meanwhile, created the Marauders map, but it's unclear what role he actually played in its creation. In the end, Peter Pettigrew, no great wizard, also became an animagus. Number 7, Lily couldn't have been that popular. Although Lily is described as a popular girl, there are very few examples of her friendships with other characters in the series. We only know about her relationship with Snape, whereas James's best friends, like Sirius and Lupin, became close to Harry. Interestingly, throughout all 7 books, we never meet a single friend of Lily's who was really close to her. This makes you wonder if she was really as popular as she's made out to be. Number 8. James was a bad father. James Potter is often hailed as a selfless hero who sacrificed everything for his son, Harry. But what if his actions weren't as noble as they seemed? James had always been a man of adventure and glory, someone who thrived on excitement. Was he really protecting his son, or was he simply defending his ideals and reputation? James's actions during his final days might have been more about proving his own bravery than about fatherhood. He was used to being the hero, not the father. We'll never know what kind of father James would have been. His death came when Harry was just a baby, leaving readers to imagine what his life would have looked like had he lived. It's not hard to imagine that James might have struggled with the responsibility of family life. With his history of arrogance and lack of self-control, it's possible that Lily would have carried the brunt of the parenting. Meanwhile, James might have continued chasing dangerous adventures, not fully understanding the impact his choices would have on his family. Number 9. Lily could have prevented the tragedy. One of the most tragic events in the series is the death of the Potters, which set the stage for countless subsequent tragedies. But what if Lily could have prevented it simply by listening to Severus Snape? She rejected him in their youth, choosing a different path and a different person. If only she had shown a little more understanding and compassion towards Severus, perhaps he would have opened up about Voldemort's plans sooner. Lily's decision to distance herself from Snape left her blind to the danger that was looming. By turning her back on Snape, Lily inadvertently pushed away the one person who could have warned her. Snape, who had information that could have saved her life, was isolated by her rejection. Lily never gave him a chance to share the truth with her. If she had only listened. In a way, Lily's actions played a significant role in the tragedy that befell her family. Her refusal to reconcile with Snape not only cost her the opportunity to know the truth, but it also shows how small moments of misunderstanding can change the course of fate. Number 10. James was a coward during school years. James Potter is often portrayed as a brave and fearless hero, but his actions in school tell a different story. He and his friends, Sirius and Remus, often ganged up on Severus Snape, using their numbers to overpower him. It wasn't courage that drove James to torment Snape. It was a desire to maintain power and dominance. James was never brave enough to face Snape one-on-one. He always had his friends by his side to make him feel stronger. This behavior calls into question the true nature of his heroism. At the core of James's actions was a deep-seated fear. Despite his outward confidence, he was terrified of being alone and rejected. His need to be popular, to be admired by his peers, pushed him to degrade others. It's easier to tear others down than to stand alone. He bullied Snape not because he was brave, but because he feared being cast aside. This need for validation made him act out in ways that hurt those around him, particularly Severus, who never stood a chance against the group. True bravery comes from standing up for others, not from using others to boost one's own ego. James's behavior towards Snape shows that his courage was often shallow, rooted in insecurity rather than strength. What kind of hero is it who lifts himself by stepping on others? James's actions in school weren't the marks of a true hero, but rather a boy trying to cover up his own fears with the appearance of confidence. Number 11, their marriage was rushed. James and Lily's marriage is often seen as a tale of true love, a bond forged in the fires of fate. But when we look closer, it becomes clear that their union was rushed, driven more by the pressures of war than by any deep understanding of each other. They were both young, barely out of their teens, when they decided to marry and start a family. At the time it seemed like the right thing to do, but was it truly the best decision? Their youth and the urgency of the times clouded their judgment, making their marriage seem more like an impulsive step than a thoughtful choice. The war was a catalyst, pushing people into decisions they might not have made otherwise. James and Lily, both fiercely passionate and deeply idealistic, may have been swept up by the urgency of the situation. They didn't have the time or space to think things through. War doesn't allow for reflection, and this may have led them to believe they needed to settle down quickly, not realizing that their rush to start a family could lead to unintended consequences. Their decision was made under immense emotional pressure, which clouded their ability to make rational choices. There's no sign that they truly knew each other as deeply as they should have before committing to such a monumental step. They were trying to outrun a war, but also themselves. The weight of the war made them act on impulse, and in doing so, they ignored the complexities of their own emotions. The fear of what was to come perhaps pushed them into an early commitment, not out of pure love, but out of a desire for security in an insecure world. Had they taken more time, they might have avoided some of the tensions and misunderstandings that marked their relationship. The rush to marry may have led to an imbalance in their marriage, with each of them carrying different emotional burdens. They didn't have the luxury of time, but that doesn't excuse the consequences of their hastiness. In the end, their marriage was not the result of careful planning, but of two young people trying to make sense of a chaotic world and finding themselves trapped in a decision that would shape their fates. Number 12. Lily made a selfish choice with Peter. The decision to make Peter Pettigrew the secret keeper for the Potter's location is one of the most puzzling moments in the Harry Potter series. While it's easy to point fingers at James or Sirius, it's possible that the decision had more to do with Lily than we think. Lily, often seen as the wise and compassionate figure, failed to insist on a more reliable choice. Why did she trust someone so unremarkable, someone she barely knew, with something so vital? It reveals a side of Lily we don't often see, carelessness and a lack of foresight. Peter Pettigrew, the very person who would betray them, was trusted to protect their most important secret. Lily must have known on some level that he wasn't the strongest candidate. She had so many better options, yet she chose him. Her decision wasn't just naive, it was selfish. She wanted the easiest solution, and Peter, with his seemingly harmless nature, was perfect candidate to keep the secret safe, or so she thought. But her choice would ultimately cost her family everything. Lily's failure to choose wisely speaks to her inability to see the risks clearly. She didn't see the potential danger in entrusting Peter with the secret, perhaps because she couldn't imagine that someone so close would betray them. Lily's mistake wasn't just an error in judgment, it was an act of profound trust in the wrong person. She allowed her emotions to cloud her decision-making, choosing what felt most comfortable rather than what was safest. This wasn't a moment of heroic wisdom, it was a moment of egotism. Her choice shattered the illusion of Lily's flawless intelligence and judgment. The price of her mistake was far higher than anyone could have anticipated. Her decision, made out of convenience or a sense of misplaced trust, led to the Potters' deaths. This reckless act wasn't just a small mistake, it was the turning point that set the tragic events into motion. Lily, the seemingly perfect heroine, proved that even the most intelligent and well-intentioned can make fatal errors when blinded by ego. Number 13. Lily looked down on her own family. Lily Potter is often portrayed as the kind, selfless witch who would do anything for others. But when we look at her relationship with her sister Petunia, we see a different side to her character. Petunia was a difficult person, yes, but Lily's indifference to her sister after leaving for Hogwarts speaks volumes. She never made an effort to reconnect with Petunia, despite knowing that her sister missed her. Lily had gone on with her life, leaving Petunia behind, as if her family no longer mattered. This wasn't the act of someone who was fully aware of the people she left behind. In fact, Lily's complete disregard for her sister's feelings is unsettling. Petunia made it clear that she felt abandoned, even jealous of the magical world Lily had embraced. "You got to go to Hogwarts, and I got to stay here with nothing," Petunia had said, her voice dripping with envy. But Lily did nothing to soothe her sister's bitterness. She didn't offer a kind word or attempt to understand Petunia's feelings. Instead, she distanced herself, content to focus solely on her new life in the magical world, as though Petunia didn't matter anymore. Lily's neglect of her sister is all the more painful because Petunia clearly craved connection. Despite all her bitterness, Petunia still looked to her sister with longing. She tried to reach out, but Lily was too absorbed in her own world. Lily was too wrapped up in her friendships, in the thrill of being part of something special, to notice the pain she caused. In this moment, Lily's perfection begins to crack. She wasn't just unaware, she was dismissive. Her refusal to acknowledge Petunia's hurt reflects a certain arrogance that undermines her image as the ideal heroine. This behavior shows a side of Lily that many fans overlook. She was not the flawless character she's often made out to be. Lily's decision to abandon her family, despite knowing the impact it had on Petunia, reveals a high level of emotional detachment. In her pursuit of her own magical life, she left her sister to suffer in silence. Was it too much to ask for Lily to make an effort to show even the slightest bit of empathy for her sister? In her pursuit of perfection, Lily ignored the flaws in her own actions. Number 14. James risked his friends for fun. James Potter's decision to become an animagus is often celebrated as a sign of his bravery and talent. However, when we look deeper into the consequences of his actions, we see a much darker side to his character. The transformation, done to keep Lupin company during his monthly transformations, was reckless and selfish. James and his friends broke the law, putting themselves at risk of becoming werewolves or worse, exposing themselves to danger without a second thought. James had risked everything for the thrill, for the amusement of the challenge, but what about his friends? It's clear from this reckless act that James didn't fully consider the potential harm he was inflicting on others. Peter Pettigrew and Sirius Black both faced life-altering consequences because of his decisions. Peter, who would later betray them, might not have been the same person if not for the dangerous path James had set them on. Sirius, forever marked by James's adventurous spirit, would lose everything when his innocence was overshadowed by the choices made during those reckless years. The charm of the Marauders' map and their carefree days at Hogwarts hides a much more troubling truth. James didn't think about the consequences of pushing his friends into situations where they could have been killed or turned into werewolves. He never once thought about what would happen if something went wrong. It's the problem with James. He was always more concerned with fun than safety. This single moment of thrill-seeking would come back to haunt them all. In the end, it was Peter who paid the ultimate price, and Sirius was wrongly imprisoned, all because of the choices James had made in his youth. James's sense of adventure came at a steep cost. He lived without considering the aftermath of his actions. His friends paid the price, and the consequences rippled through their lives, leading to tragedy. So, was the thrill worth it? The question lingers because in the end, James didn't pay the price. His friends did. Number 15, they could have joined the dark side. The idea that Lily and James Potter, the beloved heroes of the wizarding world, could have joined the dark side is both fascinating and unsettling. We are often led to believe in their inherent goodness, their selflessness, and their unshakable resolve to fight against the forces of evil. However, there is another perspective to consider, one that imagines a scenario in which their choices, circumstances, and influences led them down a very different path, one where they could have easily aligned themselves with Lord Voldemort and his followers. James Potter, as we know, was a proud and sometimes arrogant young man, especially during his years at Hogwarts. He had an immense sense of entitlement, believing that his blood status and family name gave him a special kind of superiority. His actions often reflected his desire to be the center of attention and command authority. In his school days, he was notorious for bullying Severus Snape, and while it was often written off as childish behavior, it highlighted his darker tendencies. James's need to prove himself as the best, most capable wizard often led him to use his skills and talents for show rather than for the greater good. This arrogance, while softened over the years, was a trait that could have easily spiraled into something far more dangerous if placed in the right circumstances. Imagine, for a moment, if James Potter had been raised in a different environment, one where he was surrounded by people who embraced the philosophy of pure blood supremacy and the power that came with it. There are parallels between James and many of the students from Slytherin House who became Death Eaters, individuals like Lucius Malfoy, whose wealth and bloodline made him feel superior, or even Bellatrix Lestrange, whose reckless pursuit of power knew no bounds. James, with his natural flair for magic and innate belief in his superiority, could have been molded into a similar figure, a follower of Voldemort. The pressure to align with the Dark Lord's ideology might have been too great, especially if he had been surrounded by those who celebrated his arrogance rather than challenged it. Lily Potter, on the other hand, presents an equally intriguing case. She is often portrayed as the epitome of kindness, compassion, and love. However, Lily's story is not as clear-cut as it may seem. In her youth, Lily was an incredibly talented witch, known for her sharp mind and fierce loyalty to her friends. However, there were moments in her life where her choices could have easily taken her down a different path. She, too, was drawn to the idea of power and status, even if it was not in the same overtly arrogant way as James. She was a Gryffindor, yet her decision to leave behind her family's more moderate views on blood purity and align herself with the Order of the Phoenix suggests a deep commitment to fighting the dark arts. However, what if Lily had been exposed to a different set of influences during her formative years? Like James, Lily was not immune to the lure of power. In fact, her interactions with Severus Snape at Hogwarts highlight how easily she could have aligned herself with the wrong people. Severus, who was once a close friend of Lily's, eventually fell to the dark side. The rift between them grew not just from their differing beliefs, but from their separate paths in life. Lily's decision to stand up for what she believed was right set her apart, but it also meant that she found herself isolated from some of her peers. If she had been surrounded by others who shared Snape's views, someone like Lily, with her intelligence and her natural affinity for magic, might have been seduced by the darker side of power. It is not hard to imagine a scenario where Lily, rather than embracing the fight against Voldemort, might have found solace in the purity of the Death Eaters' cause. Moreover, the environment in which Lily and James grew up also played a significant role in shaping their beliefs. James was a member of a wealthy and well-known pureblood family. His wealth, status, and connections could have easily made him a candidate for Voldemort's inner circle. It is essential to recognize that not all pureblood families were opposed to Voldemort's rise to power. In fact, many of them, like the Malfoys, were willing to offer their unwavering support to the Dark Lord in exchange for more power and influence. James, with his ambition and desire for recognition, could have seen an alliance with Voldemort as the perfect opportunity to assert his dominance and prove his superiority. Lily, too, was not immune to the societal pressures of her time. As a Muggle-born, she faced the prejudices of many in the magical community. Her path was marked by the constant need to prove her worth in a world that often viewed her as inferior. It would not have been beyond reason for Lily to become disillusioned with the constant struggle against prejudice. She could have easily turned to those who promised her a place in a world where her blood status would not matter, where her talents would be appreciated. While she was a passionate fighter for the light, there was a moment in her life when she could have just as easily embraced the darkness. Number 16. James never respected Lily's wishes. James Potter and Lily Evans are often viewed as one of the quintessential romantic couples in the Harry Potter series. Their relationship is framed as the ultimate love story, a handsome, confident young man falling in love with a brilliant, kind-hearted woman and eventually winning her heart after years of persistence. However, this romantic narrative can overshadow the more problematic elements of their relationship, particularly when examined from a different perspective, one that suggests James never truly respected Lily's desires and boundaries. From the outset of their relationship, James's behavior toward Lily was far from ideal. His persistent pursuit of her, especially during their school years, was not as noble or charming as often portrayed. As a young boy at Hogwarts, James was known for his arrogance, his bullying of Severus Snape, and his self-assurance, which often crossed into entitlement. This self-absorption was no different when it came to Lily. He relentlessly pursued her despite her clear rejections, and his behavior can hardly be dismissed as innocent infatuation. Lily, from what we know, was never impressed by James's brash confidence and cocky nature, seeing him for what he was, a boy who cared more about his image than respecting the boundaries of others. James's persistent pursuit of Lily can be seen as more of an obsession than genuine romantic interest. The fact that Lily repeatedly rejected him, yet he continued to press forward, reveals a lack of respect for her autonomy. His feelings for her were undeniably strong, but that intensity came at the cost of ignoring what she wanted. When Lily finally relented and agreed to date him, was it because she had a true change of heart, or was it a result of years of pressure from a boy who had never taken no for an answer? In the narrative of their relationship, we are led to believe that their eventual romance was the triumph of James's persistence, a romantic conquest. But should a woman have to surrender after being pursued for so long? Was Lily's decision truly one born of mutual love, or was it a weary acceptance of what had become an inevitable outcome? James' attitude toward Lily's feelings is further revealed through his actions after they began dating. He may have won her heart, but it wasn't necessarily through understanding or respecting her desires. Instead, he often seemed more focused on fulfilling his own ambitions, with little regard for what Lily herself wanted. He had a tendency to be self-centered, and in the context of their relationship, that self-centeredness often manifested in his treatment of Lily. For example, James, much like other members of the Marauders, enjoyed pulling pranks and seeking attention, actions that required a certain level of disregard for the consequences of others. While James may have thought that his brash, adventurous nature was part of his charm, Lily, on the other hand, was a more serious, studious person who had strong principles. Her character was built on kindness, intelligence, and a desire for fairness, qualities that set her apart from James's often reckless personality. Despite their differences, she agreed to be with him, but one can't help but wonder if this decision stemmed from her desire to keep the peace, or, more tragically, her belief that she had no other choice. After all, James had pursued her relentlessly, and by the time they became a couple, his feelings seemed to be non-negotiable. In fact, some of the most telling moments of their relationship, when analyzed through this lens, reveal a pattern of James' disregard for Lily's feelings. In their final year at Hogwarts, after they had begun dating, James became more comfortable around Lily, and their relationship began to take shape. But it was evident that his self-absorption was still prevalent. He was so consumed with his image as the hero and the charming Gryffindor that he often failed to see Lily as an equal partner. Lily's needs, desires, and personality often seemed to play second fiddle to James's ego and ambition. This is most evident when one considers how James treated other people, particularly Severus Snape, and the way he treated Lily in these moments of conflict. One of the most significant examples of James's lack of understanding of Lily's perspective came during the infamous confrontation between him and Snape. In this moment, James's cruelty towards Snape not only embarrassed Lily, but also hurt her deeply. Lily, who had a deep sense of justice and empathy, could never condone the way James belittled Snape, despite his own personal reasons for doing so. While James' intentions may have been to protect Lily, it's clear that he failed to understand how much his actions hurt her. Lily's response to James's actions during this time, as well as her subsequent rejection of him, revealed the disconnect between them. James may have thought he was doing something heroic by standing up to Snape, but he never took the time to understand why Lily cared so deeply for Snape in that moment. Even when James and Lily finally came together as a couple, it's possible that Lily's decision was influenced more by circumstance and exhaustion than by a deep, mutual love. The idea that Lily surrendered to James's persistence rather than actively choosing him brings into question the dynamics of their relationship. If Lily had been given the space to truly consider her feelings, would she have made the same choice? Or was she simply tired of the pressure James had placed on her? In many ways, James' persistence can be seen as a form of emotional manipulation, a strategy that, while common in stories of romantic pursuit, raises troubling questions about respect, autonomy, and the agency of the woman involved. Number 17. Lily used James to forget Snape. The complex relationships in Harry Potter extend far beyond the main characters of the series and often delve into the intricate pasts of those who came before Harry, particularly the characters of Lily Evans and Severus Snape. While many fans of the series might view Lily's eventual choice to marry James Potter as the result of a genuine romantic connection, what if there was another layer to this relationship? What if Lily's decision to be with James was less about love and more about escaping a toxic, complicated past with Severus Snape? Lily Evans and Severus Snape's relationship was a deeply painful one. From their early days at Hogwarts, they shared an intense bond that many interpreted as a deep friendship. However, this connection slowly began to deteriorate due to Snape's affiliation with dark magic and his eventual descent into the Death Eater ranks. Lily, raised with strong moral values, became increasingly disillusioned with Snape's choices. The final break came when Snape called her mudblood, a slur that rejected everything Lily stood for. This insult, alongside Snape's growing darkness, shattered their bond, leaving Lily heartbroken. While Severus later expressed regret, it was too little, too late. The wound had been inflicted, and Lily's ability to reconcile with him was permanently compromised. In the wake of this tumultuous relationship, Lily's life took a significant turn when she encountered James Potter, a popular and seemingly confident student who had once bullied Snape. Initially, Lily found James arrogant, boastful, and unappealing, seeing him as the embodiment of the very type of person she had distanced herself from. However, as time passed, James underwent a transformation. He matured, became more considerate, and developed a genuine affection for Lily. It was this newfound maturity that likely played a crucial role in shifting Lily's perspective. Yet despite James's growth, there's an argument to be made that Lily's feelings for him were not entirely driven by love, but rather by a need to move on from the lingering emotional attachment to Severus. The wounds from her past were deep, and the weight of her feelings for Snape remained a silent burden that no one fully understood, including Lily herself. Her choice to marry James could thus be viewed as an attempt to forget Severus, to close the door on a chapter of her life that had left her scarred. James, in this context, becomes more than just a romantic partner. He represents a symbol of escape. Lily was no longer the innocent girl who had been torn between her friendship with Severus and her moral convictions. She was a woman with a broken heart, a woman who had endured the bitterness of betrayal. James, with his unwavering admiration for her, provided an outlet, a way to replace the hurt with something different. In this light, their relationship appears less as a natural progression of love and more as a way for Lily to block out the emotional chaos surrounding Severus. This view of their relationship shifts the narrative of Lily and James's love story from a fairy tale romance to a more complicated, even tragic dynamic. James was the one who came to her when she needed someone to help her heal, not necessarily because they were soulmates, but because he was a stable and reassuring presence in her life. He was the right person at the right time, but perhaps not for the reasons fans might assume. The idea that Lily might have used James to forget Severus is further supported by the way she talks about her past with Snape in the Deathly Hallows. In a conversation between Harry and Snape, it is revealed that Lily had once shared a close bond with Severus, and despite their falling out, she had cared deeply for him. Her connection to Severus was not one that could simply be erased. While Lily's decision to marry James was rooted in the passing of time and healing, the remnants of her feelings for Severus lingered. This emotional scar, though never fully addressed, was a quiet undertow that influenced Lily's choices throughout her life. There's also the complexity of James's own character that plays into this theory. James, before he matured, had been a bully. His behavior towards Snape, which was cruel and reckless, left an indelible mark on Lily's perception of him. The fact that she eventually chose him over Severus speaks volumes about her capacity for forgiveness, but also hints at her internal struggle. She had to reconcile her feelings for someone who had once hurt her friend, and in doing so she might have been making a choice not out of genuine affection, but out of necessity. Lily may have needed James to heal, to forget the pain Snape caused her, and to create a life that was not defined by the darkness of her past. It is also essential to consider Lily's character in the broader context of her relationship with Snape. Lily was a fiercely intelligent and compassionate person who stood up for what was right, but she also had her vulnerabilities. The emotional toll of Snape's betrayal left her in a position where she might have been emotionally exhausted, not ready to face the complexities of a relationship with him again. Severus had chosen his path long before she had made the difficult decision to part ways with him, and in the aftermath she sought something simpler, something safer, something that would allow her to leave the past behind. James, who had once been a part of the problem, was now a solution. Number 18. Lily wasn't as peaceful as people think. Lily Evans, a figure beloved and admired in the wizarding world, stands as a paradox in her own right. Revered for her intelligence, kindness, and extraordinary talent, she often epitomizes the best of what it means to be a Gryffindor. Yet, beneath the veneer of bravery and wisdom, there lies an aspect of her character that many overlook, a certain naivete, a reluctance to fully grasp the severity of the dark times enveloping the wizarding world. She was a woman who, despite her many virtues, failed to comprehend the true danger around her, even when it stood right in front of her. Lily's story begins, like so many others, in a simpler time. Raised in the Muggle world, she had no direct experience of the struggles that were silently unfolding in the wizarding world. Her early life in the magical community might have been marked by wonder, filled with discoveries of spells and enchantments, but it was also steeped in a growing darkness. As Voldemort's rise to power grew more inevitable, many in the magical world were beginning to feel the gravity of their situation. Yet Lily, in her idealism, clung to the belief that her kindness and empathy could bring about change. Her friendship with Severus Snape, one of the most tragic and complicated relationships in the Harry Potter series, is a glaring example of this mindset. Lily's refusal to acknowledge the depths to which Snape had fallen speaks volumes about her ability to separate her vision of the world from its harsh realities. As much as she may have wished to see the good in him, she was blind to the radicalization that was taking place in his heart. It was not that she did not care for him, she did, but Lily had no comprehension of the true scope of evil that Snape was aligning himself with. This inability to face the truth is reflected in her desperate attempts to hold on to their childhood bond, to believe that Snape was still the same boy who once admired her from a distance. In the early days of their friendship, Snape was, to Lily, simply the misunderstood boy from Spinner's End. She took it upon herself to defend him from the cruel bullying of James Potter and his friends. Lily's compassion was one of her greatest strengths, but it was also her flaw. She did not see that Snape's path was diverging from hers in increasingly dangerous ways. She could not bring herself to accept that the boy she once knew had become something far more sinister, even as he began to show his true colors. The slow but inevitable shift in Snape's allegiance to the Dark Lord was something Lily could not or would not accept. She held on to the image of the boy from her childhood, refusing to believe he could be corrupted. It is important to note that Lily's blindness to Snape's radicalization did not come from a place of ignorance, but rather from her own personal beliefs. She had grown up in a world where the power of love and kindness was a constant, where she believed wholeheartedly that people could change. But this idealism proved to be both a gift and a curse. Lily's refusal to acknowledge the danger that Snape posed was indicative of a deeper misunderstanding of the true nature of the threat they were all facing. She was unable to see that some things, some people, could not be swayed by kindness alone. While she believed that love could conquer all, this belief failed her in the face of a rising darkness that did not respond to love. The most glaring example of Lily's lack of understanding comes when she confronts Snape's allegiance to Voldemort. She does not want to believe the evidence before her eyes. She refuses to accept that he could betray her and all that she stood for. She clung to the hope that her words and her friendship might pull him back from the edge. But by the time Lily and James realized the depth of Snape's commitment to the Dark Lord, it was too late. The ideological divide between them had become too great for Lily to bridge with kindness alone. In her mind, Snape was still the boy who had once been her friend, the boy who had shared her laughter, her hopes, and her dreams. But the reality was that Snape had moved far beyond the point of redemption in Lily's eyes, and this ignorance cost her dearly. This same naivete was present in Lily's understanding of the wider magical world. Even as Voldemort's power grew, even as the Ministry of Magic was paralyzed with fear, Lily remained convinced that love and goodness could triumph. She could not comprehend the scope of the danger surrounding her and her family. The precariousness of her position as a mother, her responsibility to protect Harry, was something she took with the same earnestness and kindness that defined her life. Yet her inability to fully grasp the danger posed by Voldemort was a fatal flaw. She believed that her love for her son and her husband would be enough to shield them from harm, but the reality of Voldemort's ruthless determination was far more powerful than any protective charm she could conjure. Lily's tragic end was not merely the result of Voldemort's personal vendetta against her and her family, but also the culmination of her failure to comprehend the full scope of the danger that had been growing all around her. Her belief in the power of kindness and love, while admirable, blinded her to the nature of the battle that was being fought. It was not a battle of ideals, as she thought, but one of survival, and in that struggle, love alone was not enough. She had no way of knowing that Voldemort would stop at nothing to achieve his goal of domination, that even the protective barriers of love and loyalty would not be enough to protect her from the cold logic of death. The tragedy of Lily Evans Potter lies not in her bravery or her love, but in her lack of understanding of the world she lived in. She was a woman of great heart and immense strength, but she was also one who could not or would not see the realities of the world around her. This made her a tragic hero, someone who gave everything for her loved ones, yet was ultimately defeated by her own inability to see the true nature of the threat facing her. In the end, Lily's story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of idealism in a world that is anything but ideal. It is a reminder that no matter how noble our intentions may be, there are some evils that cannot be defeated with love alone. Lily Evans was a brilliant and loving woman, but her failure to confront the darkness that was taking over the magical world led to her untimely death. She is remembered not just for the love she gave, but also for the lessons she failed to learn. Number 19. James was obsessed with being a hero. James Potter's image has long been revered in the Harry Potter universe as one of selflessness, bravery, and heroism, especially considering his tragic end in his fight against Voldemort. However, when examined through a different lens, James Potter's life and character reveal more complexities, notably the possibility that his desire to be a hero might have at times overshadowed the true essence of his actions. The idea that James was obsessed with the image of himself as a savior and that this obsession could cloud his genuine heroism challenges the traditional understanding of him as an unequivocal hero. The story of James Potter is one of contrasts, a young man driven by a need to appear courageous, yet often behaving in ways that reflect the vanity and arrogance of youth. James's early years are marked by a need to stand out, to prove himself, to be admired. In his youth at Hogwarts, he was known for his mischievous nature, his pranks, and his ability to dominate social situations. These qualities made him popular, but they also set him on a path where his identity became tied to his image rather than his true character. James was not just a charming boy, he was a boy who sought to be the center of attention, who wanted to be the hero of every story. His bravado was not merely playful, it was performative, part of a larger narrative he crafted for himself, a narrative where he was always the hero. This obsession with his own image is evident in his interactions with those around him, especially Severus Snape. The tension between James and Snape is often discussed as a key conflict of their school years, but when viewed in light of James's need to embody the role of the hero, their animosity takes on new meaning. It is easy to see how James's behavior towards Snape, which could be perceived as bullying, might stem from his desire to position himself as the gallant defender of the weak. In one instance, when James humiliates Snape in front of Lily Evans, it is less about Snape's perceived threat and more about James's desire to be seen as the hero in the eyes of his peers. The way James interacts with Snape, his public displays of dominance, are not simply reactions to Snape's insults, but rather an attempt to reaffirm his status as the school's protector, the brave young man who is always willing to stand up to evil, or at least to the person he perceives as evil. James's willingness to act with bravado and make enemies in the name of heroism seems to be part of a larger narrative where his need to be seen as a hero outweighs the more subtle, nuanced characteristics of true bravery. It is worth noting that James's boldness and confidence often bordered on arrogance. He had a way of putting others down to elevate himself. His bullying of Snape, for example, could be seen as a way of making sure no one challenged his image as the untouchable hero. Rather than genuinely confronting Snape with the hope of making amends or understanding his adversary, James sought to crush Snape in a display of power, something that at the time served only to inflate James's sense of superiority. This pattern of self-promotion through the lens of heroism was not exclusive to his interactions with Snape. James's actions as a young man seemed driven by a desire to maintain this larger-than-life image, one that he would later try to cultivate further as he grew older. In contrast, Lily Evans, who eventually became his wife, was not as easily impressed by James's charm or his bravado. She saw through the layers of performance, understanding that James's actions, while seemingly noble, were often driven by a more selfish desire to be admired. Lily's initial resistance to James's affections was not merely because of his childish behavior, but because she saw the flaws in his character, the narcissism veiled beneath his surface heroism. Despite his early flaws, James did eventually demonstrate a profound level of self-sacrifice, one that would define his legacy. He willingly gave his life for his wife and son, standing firm against Voldemort in a moment of ultimate courage. His actions on the night he died, protecting Lily and Harry, are undeniably heroic. However, it is crucial to acknowledge that this final act of selflessness may have been the culmination of a long process of growth, one that required James to let go of his obsession with appearances and accept the true nature of sacrifice. The James Potter who died protecting his family was not the same James who had bullied Snape or used his charm for social dominance. The heroism of his death was real, but it was the product of his maturation, a maturation that likely began after he realized that true heroism was not about being admired, but about making hard choices and sacrifices for others. James's transformation from the boy who sought attention and validation to the man who made the ultimate sacrifice is a testament to his character arc. However, we cannot overlook the fact that his earlier behavior was not always aligned with the values he would come to uphold. He may have been heroic in the traditional sense, but his earlier years show that he was also a product of vanity and self-interest, using his identity as a hero to shield himself from the vulnerabilities that came with being a young man, trying to find his place in the world. His behavior towards Snape is not just a reflection of a rivalry, but an indication of how far James was willing to go to maintain his image as a hero. To further complicate the view of James as a true hero, consider the implications of his friendship with Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew. James's relationship with these figures was undoubtedly important, and it is evident that his loyalty to them was genuine. However, his friendship with Sirius in particular seemed to be driven by a shared sense of defiance against authority and a desire to rebel against societal norms. The Marauder's map, a product of James's time at Hogwarts, is emblematic of this rebellious streak. While the map is undoubtedly clever and useful, it is also a tool of mischief, often used for personal gain or amusement. James's complicity in these acts of rebellion shows that his desire to be a hero was sometimes at odds with the deeper values of responsibility and humility that come with true heroism. James's life, like many, is defined by a struggle between his desire to be seen as a hero and the complexity of his character. His early actions demonstrate that heroism was, for him, as much about image as it was about action. He was not simply a hero because of the sacrifices he made, but because he craved the recognition that came with it. In his youth, he was consumed with the idea of being the bold protector, the shining figure who would always be there to save the day. This desire often led him to act impulsively, without full consideration of the consequences, as he sought to live up to the role he had created for himself. In the end, James Potter was a complex character whose heroism was defined not just by the final noble sacrifice he made for his family, but also by the journey of self-discovery that led him to that point. His life was a process of transformation, one where his need to be seen as a hero evolved into a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to protect and love. James was not born a hero, he became one through the mistakes he made and the lessons he learned. The heroism we admire in him is not the product of a flawless life, but the result of a young man who, in the end, gave up his need for glory and embraced the quiet, uncelebrated courage that comes with genuine sacrifice. Number 20. Their death is romanticized too much. The deaths of Lily and James Potter are often viewed through a lens of tragic heroism, the story of two parents sacrificing everything to protect their son, Harry. Their story is woven into the fabric of wizarding history, iconic for its representation of the ultimate act of love. Yet when this narrative is dissected, another more complex truth emerges, one that challenges the idealized image of their sacrifice. The love they showed Harry was undeniable, but their deaths were not simply the result of a noble choice. They were the outcome of a series of mistakes, missed opportunities, and errors in judgment. James and Lily had been a part of the Order of the Phoenix, a group dedicated to resisting Lord Voldemort and his followers. In this context, their actions seem heroic. They fought for the greater good, putting their lives on the line to protect others. However, the decisions that led to their deaths cannot be ignored. While they were brave, they were also at times reckless in their determination to remain in the fight against dark forces. In the years leading up to their deaths, they made choices that, in hindsight, appear misguided, even though their intentions were undoubtedly good. One of the most glaring mistakes made by James and Lily was their failure to take the full measure of the danger surrounding them. Despite the warnings from friends, they chose to stay in Godric's Hollow, a location that became their final resting place. Though it was well known that Voldemort was actively hunting them, they did not take the extra precautions that might have saved their lives. The Potters could have gone into hiding under a different guise, assuming a new identity, much like Sirius Black did. But they chose not to, perhaps out of a misguided belief that they were invincible or too proud to retreat. This decision was not born from stupidity or ignorance. It came from an emotional desire to continue the fight, to resist the fear that Voldemort instilled in the wizarding world. Yet this choice ultimately proved to be fatal. What is often overlooked in the retelling of Lily and James's final days is the role of their most trusted friend, Peter Pettigrew. The very man they had placed their faith in, the one who swore to keep their secret safe, was the person who betrayed them. James and Lily had entrusted their lives to Peter, believing him to be a loyal friend. They were blind to his weaknesses, to the potential for betrayal that lay within him. This trust, this blind faith, was a fatal flaw. In their rush to defeat Voldemort, they overlooked the cracks in their inner circle. They did not see the darker side of Pettigrew until it was too late, and that naivety cost them their lives. One of the most tragic aspects of their deaths is the lack of preparedness for the eventuality of Voldemort's attack. The Potters had gone into hiding, but they hadn't fully embraced the necessary measures that might have protected them. The Fidelius Charm, a powerful spell that could have concealed their location indefinitely, was employed, but it was only as strong as the secrecy maintained by their secret keeper. The choice of Peter Pettigrew as secret keeper was not the best decision. While it was a clever move, designed to ensure Voldemort would never suspect Peter, it was a decision made out of trust, not caution. The true secret keeper should have been someone stronger, more trustworthy, someone with more to lose, in case of betrayal. The fact that they trusted someone as weak as Pettigrew shows a lack of foresight and, quite frankly, a failure to recognize the danger posed by their enemies. The Potter's story is one of love, yes, but also one of responsibility and foresight. Their ultimate sacrifice was not entirely voluntary. It was, in part, the result of a cascade of avoidable errors. While they are often lauded for their bravery and the love they shared, there is a darker truth behind their deaths. They didn't take full responsibility for their safety, nor did they fully understand the gravity of their position in the war. Their youthful optimism, their desire to stand up against Voldemort no matter the cost, clouded their judgment. They were caught in the fervor of their cause, forgetting that heroism is not simply about fighting evil, but about preparing for the consequences of that fight. Moreover, the way their deaths are romanticized often obscures the lessons that could be learned from them. By focusing on the ultimate sacrifice, their love for Harry, their willingness to die for him, people forget to examine the decisions that led them to that point. James and Lily were not infallible. They were not flawless figures. Their lives and deaths offer important lessons about the importance of taking responsibility, of considering the long-term ramifications of one's actions, and of recognizing that heroism is not just about courage, but about wisdom and foresight. For example, had they chosen to go into hiding more effectively, had they been more circumspect in their relationships and more cautious with their trust, the outcome of their story could have been entirely different. This is not to say that they were selfish or negligent, but that in their zeal to fight against Voldemort and to protect Harry, they lost sight of the practical aspects of survival. In a war, it is easy to forget that the fight for the greater good can sometimes be won through small, everyday choices, choices that involve caution, patience, and long-term planning. The tragic deaths of Lily and James Potter should serve as a reminder that heroism is not a black-and-white concept. It is not simply about noble sacrifice or selflessness. It is about the ability to see the bigger picture, to weigh the consequences of one's actions, and to take responsibility for the decisions made. Their deaths were a result of a combination of trust, love, and misjudgments, and it is crucial to acknowledge all of these factors when discussing their legacy. To view them solely as martyrs who made the ultimate sacrifice is to ignore the lessons they left behind, the lessons of responsibility, caution, and the need for careful, deliberate action in the face of danger. In examining their deaths with a more critical eye, we can begin to understand that the story of Lily and James Potter is not just one of heroic sacrifice, but one of human fallibility. Their love for Harry, while undoubtedly powerful, was not enough to shield them from the consequences of their actions. They made mistakes, they trusted the wrong people, and they failed to take the necessary steps to protect themselves. Their deaths, though tragic, offer a sobering lesson about the complexities of heroism and about the importance of considering the consequences of one's choices, even when those choices are made out of love. The romanticization of their deaths obscures these lessons, and it is only by acknowledging their mistakes that we can truly appreciate the depth of their sacrifice. Number 21. They weren't ready to be parents. James Potter and Lily Evans were two young and deeply passionate individuals caught in the swirling chaos of a wizarding world at war. Their love for each other and for their child, Harry, was undeniable, but beneath the surface of this affection lay the harsh reality of their choices. It is tempting to view them as martyrs of love, sacrificing everything to protect their son from the evil that threatened to engulf the world. Yet, when one steps back and examines their actions, it becomes evident that they were, in many ways, unprepared for parenthood. The war against Voldemort was at its height when Lily and James made the life-altering decision to bring a child into the world. a time when terror and death hung over every family like a dark cloud, when friends were lost and betrayal was just around the corner. Lily had once been a hopeful young woman, a bright student at Hogwarts with dreams of fighting injustice, while James had been the confident, talented, and somewhat arrogant boy who eventually became a leader of the Order of the Phoenix. Together they had stood at the forefront of the resistance against Voldemort. But the pressures of war, with its constant fear, death, and betrayal, began to take their toll on them as individuals and as a couple. They decided to have Harry, perhaps as an act of hope, a defiance against the overwhelming darkness that threatened to consume the wizarding world. But there was a certain naivety in their decision. The birth of their son should have been a cause for celebration, yet it was a moment overshadowed by the looming shadow of Voldemort's power. To bring a child into such an unstable world was a choice filled with both optimism and ignorance. It was as if, in a world so filled with uncertainty, they needed to believe in something pure, something that could symbolize hope, something like a child. However, while James and Lily's love for their son Harry was clear and powerful, it was not enough to shield him from the perils they had failed to foresee. The couple, while brave and determined, did not consider the consequences of bringing a child into a world that was quite literally at war. They failed to acknowledge the extent of the danger surrounding them, the inevitable risks that came with their position in the Order of the Phoenix, and the very real possibility that Voldemort's forces would target their family. In the midst of fighting a war, raising a child in a home so constantly threatened by danger required a level of foresight and planning that James and Lily, despite their intelligence and resourcefulness, did not possess. Their naivety is most apparent when one looks at their decision to stay in Godric's Hollow, despite knowing that Voldemort was actively hunting down members of the Order. They had not taken the necessary precautions to ensure their own safety and, by extension, the safety of Harry. It was only after the prophecy was made that Voldemort set his sights on their family. But even before then, they were living under the constant threat of danger, yet they chose not to leave the country or seek stronger protection. The magical protections around their home were formidable, but they proved insufficient against the cunning of their enemy. Had they considered the possibility that Voldemort might turn to darker methods, such as using someone within their inner circle to betray them, they might have made different choices. The tale of Lily and James' decision to remain in Godric's Hollow is not one of tragedy alone. It is a story of unpreparedness. They were so determined to fight for their cause, to stand strong in the face of evil, that they overlooked the importance of ensuring Harry's safety. James was a proud man, quick to action, often more driven by instinct than careful planning. He was the kind of person who believed in the power of resistance, in standing firm, and perhaps in some ways he underestimated the magnitude of the enemy he was facing. Lily, on the other hand, was fiercely protective, but also driven by a sense of duty and love. Both of them were willing to risk everything to protect Harry, yet they did so without fully understanding the magnitude of the threat that loomed over them. The tragedy of their deaths is not just a story of their love and sacrifice, but also of the bitter reality of being unprepared for the harsh demands of parenthood in times of war. They were so consumed with fighting for the greater good that they failed to foresee the immediate danger to their family. Their inability to secure Harry's safety led directly to the terrible consequences that followed. Even when they did attempt to protect their son by invoking the most powerful magic available, the sacrificial protection Lily cast over Harry, their own failure to plan adequately had already set the stage for the devastation that would follow. It is crucial to understand that James and Lily's love for Harry was not the issue. Their love was pure and unquestionable. However, love alone is not always enough. It was their failure to think ahead, to anticipate the worst-case scenarios, and to take the necessary steps to safeguard their son that led to Harry's life being marred by danger from the very beginning. They may have thought they were doing everything in their power to protect him, but in the end, their choices betrayed the very child they sought to shield. The consequences of their unpreparedness are far-reaching. Harry's entire childhood was defined by loss and danger. From the moment he was born, he was thrust into a world where Voldemort's shadow loomed large, and he would never know what it was like to grow up in peace. His parents' inability to protect him, their failure to take the necessary precautions, meant that Harry was marked from the start as a target. Even the love of his parents, the most powerful shield against evil in the wizarding world, could not prevent the inevitable fate that awaited them. As much as we romanticize the idea of Harry Potter's parents as heroes, their story also serves as a cautionary tale about the realities of parenthood in a world filled with danger. They were young, headstrong, and determined, but they were also tragically unprepared. They did not anticipate the ruthlessness of Voldemort, nor did they fully understand the depth of the sacrifices required to protect their son from such a powerful enemy. In the end, their good intentions and love for Harry were not enough to safeguard him, and the repercussions of their actions affected not only their own lives, but also the life of their son. In the context of their love, this unpreparedness does not diminish their legacy, but adds complexity to their characters. James and Lily were brave, but their bravery, though noble, was flawed. Their story serves as a reminder that even the most well-intentioned individuals, those driven by love and hope, can falter in the face of the overwhelming demands of parenthood, especially in a world consumed by war. The death of Lily and James Potter did not only signify a tragic loss for the wizarding world, it marked the beginning of a long and dangerous journey for their son, who would grow up knowing that love alone, no matter how powerful, could not always protect him from the darkness that loomed over his life. Number 22, they forgave Sirius too easily. In the world of Harry Potter, the Potters' deaths are one of the most pivotal moments in the series. The tragic demise of Lily and James Potter has been analysed from various perspectives, but a closer look at their relationship with Sirius Black reveals an unsettling layer of complexity and unspoken tension. The Potters, particularly James and Lily, are often seen as tragic heroes whose love for each other and their son were undeniable, yet their swift forgiveness of Sirius Black after his betrayal is a subject that raises some important questions, particularly when viewed through the lens of their decisions in the final moments before their deaths. One of the most pressing mysteries revolves around the question of why Sirius Black was so quickly accused of betrayal after the deaths of Lily and James. Everyone, even those in the Order of the Phoenix, was quick to cast blame on him without a second thought. His guilt was assumed, and no one, not even those who had been closest to him, seemed to doubt it. The question remains, why was Sirius so readily blamed? Was there something more to the Potters' trust in him and their eventual betrayal by him that might shed light on their final days? A theory that has gained traction among fans suggests that James and Lily, in a final desperate attempt to protect Harry, decided to change the secret keeper of their Fidelius charm without telling Voldemort. This secret, which could have been kept by one of their closest friends, was transferred to Peter Pettigrew, the unassuming, treacherous friend. If this theory is true, it casts a new light on Sirius's role in the Potters' lives. Why would James and Lily, who had known and loved Sirius like a brother, take such a crucial step without informing him? Was it possible that James had lost complete trust in his best friend before the fateful night of their deaths? James's relationship with Sirius was complicated. As a young man, James was confident, even arrogant, and often dominated his relationships. He had a certain bravado that made him both charming and at times infuriating to those around him. This was particularly true with Sirius, his closest friend, who often played the role of an equal, yet found himself on the receiving end of James's complex personality. The trust that existed between the two was built over many years of shared experiences, but it was never flawless. There were moments when their friendship was strained, particularly when James's brash nature clashed with Sirius's impulsive tendencies. Despite this, they were still the closest of companions, until perhaps the moment that James chose to change the secret keeper without informing Sirius. If James had truly lost trust in Sirius before the betrayal, then his decision to place the fate of his family in Sirius's hands becomes even more perplexing. On one hand, James's love and loyalty to Sirius would have made it almost impossible for him to imagine a world where his best friend would betray him. But on the other hand, there were clear signs that James was not fully comfortable with the idea of entrusting such a life-or-death secret to his friend, especially considering Sirius's reckless and impetuous nature. The relationship between James and Sirius was not perfect, and their falling out toward the end of the First Wizarding War, when Sirius left the Potters' home after a disagreement, suggests that there were cracks in their once unshakable friendship. The fact that James and Lily were so quick to forgive Sirius after the betrayal also raises significant questions about their understanding of what had truly transpired. If James harbored doubts about Sirius, why did he entrust his family's fate to him? And if Lily, who knew her husband's doubts, did not intervene or demand an honest conversation with Sirius, what does that say about her role in this dynamic? Lily and James were not naive. They were well aware of the dangers they faced, especially in a world filled with deceit and deception. Their failure to address the underlying tensions with Sirius, or to communicate more openly about their fears and concerns, may have been the very thing that led to their tragic end. As the events unfolded, Sirius was blamed for betraying his friends. His actions, or perceived actions, led to the downfall of the Potters, and yet there is a significant gap between the evidence and the conclusions drawn by others. Sirius, after all, was not the only one who could have leaked the information to Voldemort. In fact, the more one looks at the situation, the more apparent it becomes that Peter Pettigrew was the true traitor, not Sirius. Yet despite the overwhelming evidence that points to Pettigrew's guilt, Sirius was the one who was vilified, and for years he was forced to live with the burden of being blamed for something he did not do. The quick forgiveness of Sirius after the Potters' deaths also speaks to something deeper. The deep love and understanding that Lily and James had for him, despite their apparent doubts. The Potters had always been open-hearted, willing to give second chances even when others had faltered. It is clear that they were deeply in love, not just with each other but with their friends as well. The tragic irony, however, is that their willingness to forgive and their trust in those they loved ultimately played a role in their demise. If Lily and James had had the courage to confront Sirius about their suspicions, if they had been more forthright in discussing their fears and doubts, perhaps things could have turned out differently. It is also important to consider Lily's role in all of this. As a mother, she was undoubtedly concerned for the safety of her son, Harry. But was she so trusting of James's decisions that she overlooked the possibility of his doubts about Sirius? Lily was a fierce protector of her loved ones, yet she did not intervene in her husband's decision-making process when it came to Sirius. This lack of communication and the failure to fully address their concerns may have been one of the key factors in their tragic deaths. Had Lily insisted on a more open conversation about Sirius's loyalty, perhaps they could have made a more informed decision regarding their secret keeper. Furthermore, the trust that Lily and James placed in Sirius, despite the growing tension, is indicative of the complexities that lie within their friendship. Sirius, for all his flaws, was a person whom they both deeply cared about, and they had a hard time seeing him as capable of betrayal. This, however, may have clouded their judgment. Their decision to forgive him quickly without fully understanding the circumstances or having the conversation they needed to have resulted in them being unable to protect themselves from the betrayal that would follow. The tragedy of the Potters' deaths is, in part, a tragedy of communication, or rather the lack thereof. Their inability to speak openly and honestly about their doubts and fears, their failure to address the issues surrounding their decision to change the Secret Keeper, cost them their lives. In the end, the Potters' willingness to forgive and move past their doubts may have been their undoing. It was a noble sentiment driven by love and loyalty, but it also exposed the vulnerability in their relationships, vulnerabilities that were tragically exploited by the forces of darkness they were fighting against. If James and Lily had confronted Sirius, if they had been more open about their concerns, it's possible that they could have avoided the disaster that led to their deaths, but the Potters, in their tragic optimism and trust, allowed their doubts to go unspoken, and in doing so set into motion a chain of events that ultimately cost them everything. The Potters were not only the victims of Voldemort's attack, but also the victims of their own unspoken truths, truths that, had they been acknowledged, might have saved them. Number 23. Lily didn't understand the world she lived in. Lily Potter has often been portrayed as the embodiment of kindness, tolerance, and compassion in the world of Harry Potter. She is described as selfless, caring, and always willing to put others before herself. Her love for Harry is legendary, and her sacrifice is considered one of the most powerful acts of love in the wizarding world. Yet, when we dig deeper into her role in the war against Voldemort, we may find that Lily was far more complex than the simple, peace-loving character we often picture. She was not merely a gentle soul, she was a determined fighter, capable of making tough decisions even in the face of death. Lily's involvement in the Order of the Phoenix is a testament to her strength, but it also reveals a side of her that is rarely discussed. The Order was not a place for the faint-hearted. It was a clandestine group working on the front lines of a brutal war, where lives were constantly at risk. When Lily joined the Order, she became a part of this dangerous resistance movement, one that was willing to take on the Dark Lord and his followers directly. Joining the Order was not a casual decision. It meant accepting a role in a battle that would demand much more than just bravery. It meant being prepared to kill if necessary. Throughout the series, we see how Lily was capable of standing up for what was right, even if it meant making enemies. She didn't shy away from confrontation, whether it was with the likes of Severus Snape or the Death Eaters who threatened the safety of her loved ones. This is a woman who, despite her nurturing qualities, was also fiercely protective and willing to fight for what she believed in. Lily was not naive, and she was not afraid to make hard choices. The fact that she was willing to face Voldemort and his followers head-on shows a level of resolve that goes beyond just being a passive observer of the events happening around her. There is a moment in the Harry Potter series where the complexity of Lily's character is brought into sharp focus. When Snape reveals his memories to Harry in The Prince's Tale, we see Lily in a new light. She is no longer the perfect, untouchable figure that Harry had imagined. In the memories, Lily is fierce and unapologetic, willing to stand her ground even when Snape, who was her close friend, insults her and her family. Her rejection of Snape's offer to join him in his dark path is not just a simple moral stand. It is an assertion of her own values, her own unyielding belief that the right thing was worth fighting for, even if it meant sacrificing friendships. Her confrontation with Snape reveals a deeper layer of her personality. It is clear that Lily was not someone who could be easily manipulated or cowed by anyone, even those who had once been her closest allies. This is the same woman who, alongside her husband James, fought to stop the growing influence of Voldemort and his Death Eaters. She didn't just stand by watching the war unfold from a distance, she actively participated in it. Her courage and determination were essential parts of the fight against the Dark Lord, and these qualities are what allowed her to be one of the Order's most valuable members. Lily's relationship with her husband, James, is another aspect that reveals her strength of character. James Potter was known for his arrogance and sometimes reckless behavior, especially during his school years. Yet Lily's ability to see beyond his youthful misgivings and fall in love with him speaks volumes about her personality. She was not someone who accepted things at face value. She knew James's faults but chose to see the good in him. This ability to look past someone's flaws and still fight for them shows a deeper level of resilience. In the war against Voldemort, Lily's connection to James was more than just a romantic bond, it was a partnership in the truest sense. Both of them were willing to put themselves in danger for the cause, and both were ready to make the ultimate sacrifice if necessary. But Lily's actions were not limited to her role in the Order. The act that ultimately led to her death, the act of protecting Harry, was an extension of this fierce, protective instinct she had. When Voldemort came to kill Harry, it was not just a matter of love for her son, it was a final, defiant act of resistance against the Dark Lord. She stood between Voldemort and her child, and in doing so, she displayed an unshakable determination. This was not a woman who would cower or back down. She was not afraid to face death in order to protect what mattered most to her, and she did so with the same unwavering resolve that had characterized her actions throughout the war. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, we learn that Lily's decision to die for Harry was not just a spontaneous act. It was a deliberate choice, an expression of the same fierce commitment she had shown throughout her life. The love she had for her son was not a passive, quiet love. It was an active, powerful force, one that defied the darkest magic and saved Harry's life. This is not the act of a soft, delicate person. It is the act of a mother who would do anything to protect her child, even if it meant facing certain death. But what about her capacity for anger and her possible darker sides? Lily was not a saint. Her decision to speak out against Snape and her rejection of him could be seen as harsh, especially considering their past friendship. Yet, this moment also shows her unwillingness to compromise her beliefs, even when it meant alienating someone she once cared about. This kind of resolve, while admirable, can also be seen as an unwillingness to forgive or extend grace. In some ways, Lily's character shows the fine line between righteousness and unforgiving stubbornness. She was willing to sever ties with Snape despite his plea for redemption, and in doing so she took a hard stand that would have repercussions not just for her, but for Harry as well. This aspect of her character is also evident in her relationship with her own family. Lily's close bond with her sister Petunia was fractured by the differences in their lives, particularly when it came to their magical abilities. Petunia's jealousy and resentment towards Lily's magical powers were never fully healed, and Lily's decision to distance herself from her sister shows that she was not always the forgiving, selfless person she is often made out to be. She was capable of holding grudges, and in the case of Petunia, that grudge lasted her entire life. Even in her death, Lily's actions can be viewed as both selfless and somewhat harsh. Her refusal to surrender Harry to Voldemort, even when it meant that she would die, was an act of both love and defiance. It is easy to see Lily as a martyr, a tragic hero who sacrificed herself for the greater good. But it's important to remember that Lily's death was not a simple, self-sacrificial act. It was a battle, a final stand against the forces that had taken everything from her. And in that battle, she showed that she was far more than just a symbol of kindness and compassion. She was a fighter, someone who was willing to do whatever it took to protect those she loved, even if it meant facing the ultimate sacrifice. In the end, Lily Potter was not just a gentle, peace-loving figure. She was a warrior, one who fought for what was right and was willing to make difficult choices in the pursuit of justice. Her kindness and compassion were not weaknesses but strengths that were honed in the crucible of war. She was not a perfect hero, but she was a hero nonetheless, one whose legacy was shaped by her courage, her love, and her unwavering determination to do what was right, no matter the cost. Number 24. James never admitted his mistakes. James Potter stands as one of the most complicated and controversial figures in the Harry Potter series. Widely celebrated for his bravery, charm, and loyalty, he is also notorious for his arrogance and cruelty, especially during his school years. His actions and attitudes are often examined through the eyes of others, particularly his friends Sirius Black and Remus Lupin, and, most prominently, through the lens of Severus Snape, who harbored a lifelong resentment toward James. However, the question arises, did James ever fully recognize the consequences of his actions, especially regarding the bullying of Snape? The answer is not as clear-cut as it might seem, and the books provide a somewhat ambiguous view of his growth. In The Order of the Phoenix, when Harry sees the pensive memories of Snape's youth, the cruelty of James towards Snape is vividly laid bare. In one particular memory, James humiliates Snape in front of Lily Evans, demonstrating not only his superiority complex, but also his willingness to use his popularity and power to dominate others. James's behavior in this instance is appalling, and it is hard to justify or excuse it, especially when considering that Snape is not depicted as being particularly antagonistic at this point. Instead, he is simply an awkward, resentful student, not deserving of such treatment. Despite this, the scene implies that James underwent some form of change, or at least a realization of his past mistakes, a transformation that some believe is evidenced by his later actions. However, there are no direct instances in the books where James himself explicitly acknowledges his wrongdoing or apologizes to Snape. The narrative does not offer any moment where James directly faces the pain he caused. Even though Harry is told by Sirius and Lupin that James grew out of his earlier arrogance and bullying, there is no definitive confirmation in the canon that James recognized the full scope of the harm he inflicted. Sirius and Lupin's testimony is valuable, yet it is not a first-hand account from James himself, who never publicly or privately admits his mistakes, at least not in a way that would allow readers to fully comprehend his understanding of the damage done. It could be argued that James simply grew up, as many people do. Adolescence is often a time of recklessness, and James's behavior, while undeniably harmful, could be seen as a reflection of youthful immaturity rather than a permanent character flaw. James may have matured with age, particularly after meeting Lily and embarking on his quest to become a better person in her eyes. However, this shift in focus, from self-centered and arrogant to being more devoted and kind, does not necessarily indicate a true understanding of past wrongs. Rather, it might suggest that he redirected his energy toward a new, more noble cause, Lily. This is not uncommon for young adults. They may change their behavior for a specific reason, yet not fully examine or come to terms with their past mistakes. James, in this case, could have simply been caught up in his desire to win Lily's affection and to become someone worthy of her love, without confronting the emotional scars he left on others, particularly Snape. The absence of any form of repentance or acknowledgement from James raises interesting questions about his personal growth. Did he truly evolve into a better person, or did he merely shift his priorities and leave his past behind? It is significant that James's relationship with Lily seems to be at the forefront of his personal transformation. His earlier actions, such as bullying Snape, are never fully discussed or reflected upon in relation to his later self. We know that James matured enough to become a respected member of the Order of the Phoenix, yet there is no indication that he ever took the time to understand the gravity of his actions during his school days. He may have changed, but it seems unlikely that he fully grasped the damage he caused. Lily, who was James's ultimate goal and who eventually married him, might also offer some insight into his transformation. She was, after all, a witness to his behavior as a student, and yet chose to be with him later in life. However, Lily's decision to be with James may not necessarily indicate that she saw a deep and genuine personal transformation. Rather, it might suggest that she simply forgave him or overlooked the past. There is a difference between forgiveness and true repentance, and Lily's acceptance of James could be seen as a gesture of compassion rather than a confirmation that James had made amends with those he had wronged. Furthermore, it is worth considering that Lily herself might have been in love with the idea of James, especially when compared to Snape's darker and more mysterious nature. Her choice could have been as much about rejecting Snape's darker tendencies as it was about accepting James's newfound maturity. For Snape, the absence of any apology from James is perhaps the most painful aspect of their relationship. Snape carries his hatred for James throughout his life, and this grudge influences many of his actions, including his interactions with Harry Potter. Snape's bitterness is understandable, especially when considering how deeply James's cruelty wounded him. The lack of any closure or acknowledgement from James only serves to perpetuate Snape's pain. Unlike Lily, who may have been able to forgive James, Snape was never given that opportunity. The absence of an apology or even an acknowledgement of past wrongs might explain why Snape could never let go of his hatred for James, even long after his death. James, of course, is not the only character in the series to avoid confronting their past mistakes. Harry himself struggles with understanding the complexities of his relationships with others, particularly his father. Throughout the series, Harry is presented with conflicting stories about James's character, and the more he learns, the more confused he becomes. On the one hand, Harry is told that James was a heroic figure who fought bravely against Voldemort, but on the other hand, he discovers that James was also capable of cruelty. Harry's journey, in a way, mirrors James's lack of self-reflection, as Harry too must come to terms with his own flaws without the benefit of complete understanding or closure from those he cares about. Perhaps the most telling moment regarding James's character comes not from the pensive memories or the testimonies of his friends, but from the way he is remembered by others. While Lily may have forgiven him, and while Sirius and Lupin may have spoken of his transformation, it is clear that James's legacy is not one of perfect heroism. Instead, his legacy is tainted by the unresolved bitterness of Snape and by the lack of any real reconciliation or atonement for his actions. He is remembered as a great wizard and a brave man, but also as someone who, at least during his school years, did not fully understand the consequences of his behavior. In the end, it is clear that James's story is one of both growth and limitation. He did grow, but not in the way that might have allowed him to fully atone for his past. Instead, his maturation came through the shift in focus from himself to Lily, and later to his son Harry. This shift in focus may have been necessary for his development, but it did not necessarily lead to the deeper self-awareness that might have allowed him to confront his mistakes. While James's bravery and sacrifice are ultimately what define him, they do not erase the harm he caused. In many ways, James Potter's character is a testament to the fact that growth is not always accompanied by a full understanding of past wrongs. And it is this lack of acknowledgement, this failure to face the hurt he caused, that continues to haunt both Snape and, to some extent, Harry Potter. Number 25. Lily might have used Snape. In the world of Harry Potter, few relationships are as complex as that of Severus Snape and Lily Evans. Their bond, formed during childhood, is often seen as one of the great unrequited loves of the series. Snape's devotion to Lily was unwavering. Even after their paths diverged, he continued to love her, even though she married James Potter, his rival. But what if there was more to Lily's relationship with Snape than just pure friendship? What if, instead of the saintly, selfless Lily we all know, there was a more calculating side to her, a side that understood and even exploited Snape's affections? One of the most painful theories that has surfaced within the Harry Potter fandom is the idea that Lily Evans might have used Severus Snape. Snape's love for Lily was deep and all-consuming, a love that began in their childhood days at Hogwarts. He adored her, followed her around, and was utterly devoted to her. Lily, however, did not reciprocate these feelings. While she was undoubtedly fond of Snape as a friend, her heart was always set on James Potter. This discrepancy in their feelings was, of course, a source of great pain for Snape, who saw their friendship as something more than it was. But could Lily have known all along the power she held over Snape? Lily, as a young woman, was not unaware of Snape's feelings. She was intelligent, perceptive, and deeply aware of the dynamics around her. Even though she did not return Snape's affections, it's possible that she saw him as a source of emotional support, someone who would always be there for her, no matter what. In her early years at Hogwarts, Lily had her share of struggles. She was friends with Snape, a fellow outcast in a world of wizards who were often divided by blood status. At first, she tolerated Snape's obsession, perhaps out of pity or a sense of loyalty. But as Snape became more obsessed with the dark arts and began to distance himself from Lily, it's plausible to consider that she may have begun to recognize his loyalty as something to be taken advantage of. Lily's decision to sever ties with Snape was not instantaneous. It was a gradual progression that culminated in the fateful moment when Snape called her a mudblood. This derogatory term was the final straw for Lily, and it's easy to assume that she cut Snape off because of the insult. But what if there was more to it than just the word? Snape's actions represented more than just a betrayal of friendship. They symbolized a betrayal of the emotional dynamic that Lily had carefully constructed. For years, Snape had been a constant presence in Lily's life, a person who adored her and could be relied upon. She knew that he would always be there for her, no matter what. But the moment he dared to insult her, something changed. Perhaps, deep down, Lily realized that she no longer needed Snape. She had James now, and with him came status, respect, and love, things Snape could never give her. Lily's reaction to Snape's insult was swift and unforgiving. She cut him off completely, abandoning their friendship without a second thought. There was no reconciliation, no attempt to understand Snape's point of view, despite the fact that she knew him better than anyone. This sudden and complete rejection seems like more than just a reaction to a moment of anger. It feels like a calculated move. After all, Lily knew that Snape was not someone who could easily let go of his feelings for her. The very nature of his devotion to her was something she could manipulate. She had always been the center of his world, and now she simply moved on to someone else, someone who would never be as devoted as Snape had been. This shows a side of Lily that many fans overlook, a side that recognized the power she had over Snape and used it to her advantage. There is also the possibility that Lily enjoyed the attention Snape gave her. From the moment they met, Snape was infatuated with her. He admired her intelligence, her beauty, and her kindness. Lily had never lacked for attention. She was a talented witch, admired by many, but Snape's affection was different. His love for her was all-consuming, something that bordered on obsession. It's entirely possible that Lily enjoyed being the object of Snape's intense affection. She may have appreciated the fact that Snape would always protect her, always be there for her, no matter how she treated him. In many ways, Snape's devotion to her allowed Lily to remain at the center of his world while she continued with her life and relationships without worrying about the consequences of her actions. This theory is further supported by Lily's interactions with James Potter. It is clear that Lily had a deep connection with James, but their relationship was not without its own complexities. James had, after all, once been an arrogant bully, and Lily's feelings for him were not always positive. It was only over time that they grew close, and even then, it was not a perfect relationship. James had his own flaws, just as Lily did. Yet, unlike Snape, James was someone who could stand up to Lily and challenge her. He was not afraid to push back against her, something Snape never did. James did not worship her, he loved her. In some ways, this dynamic was healthier for Lily than the one she had with Snape. However, what if Lily's preference for James was not just about his love for her, but about the fact that James did not need her as much as Snape did? Perhaps Lily was attracted to James precisely because he was not as emotionally dependent on her, something Snape had always been. Lily's ability to keep Snape close, while simultaneously keeping him at arm's length, speaks to her complex nature. She was not just a passive recipient of Snape's devotion, she understood the power dynamics at play. She knew that Snape's love for her was boundless, and she may have recognized that she could use it to her advantage. Snape, on the other hand, never seemed to fully understand how deeply Lily could manipulate his emotions. His love for her blinded him to the fact that Lily was not always as innocent or selfless as she appeared. In some ways, Snape's own feelings were his undoing. He loved her so deeply that he failed to see that Lily had already moved on both emotionally and in her relationships. When Snape betrayed Lily by calling her a mudblood, it was more than just an insult. It was a sign of his own desperation. Snape was no longer the person Lily had known. He had joined the Death Eaters, and in doing so, he had cast aside the friendship that had once been so important to him. Lily, however, was not about to tolerate being insulted, even by someone she had once called a friend. Her swift rejection of Snape in that moment can be seen as an attempt to reclaim her power in the relationship. No longer did she need Snape's devotion. She had James, and she had the life she wanted. Snape, in contrast, was left broken, his love unrequited, his loyalty unreturned. Lily's decision to use Snape's affections, while painful, adds a layer of complexity to her character that is often overlooked. She was not a perfect person, nor was she completely innocent in her interactions with Snape. Her ability to manipulate Snape's feelings without ever fully reciprocating them speaks to a level of emotional intelligence and perhaps emotional manipulation that many fans of the series fail to recognize. Lily's actions were not just a response to Snape's betrayal, they were a response to the power dynamic that she had created between them. Snape was a tool she had used, and when he was no longer of use to her, she discarded him. This theory does not diminish Lily's character. Rather, it adds depth to her actions and choices. It shows that even the most beloved characters in the Harry Potter universe are not beyond reproach. Lily, like all people, was flawed, And in her relationship with Snape, she made choices that reflect a more complicated side of her personality. Whether or not we choose to see Lily's actions as manipulative, the reality is that she used Snape for years, and when he no longer served her emotional needs, she let him go, leaving him to carry the weight of his unrequited love for the rest of his life. Number 26. James joined the war for fame. James Potter is often remembered as the heroic, selfless individual who made the ultimate sacrifice to protect his family and the wizarding world. His image is that of a daring, noble figure who stood bravely against the forces of darkness. Yet as we look deeper into his character, an alternate perspective emerges, one that suggests James's motivations for joining the Order of the Phoenix may not have been purely selfless, but rather rooted in a more personal ambition. What if, beneath the surface of his courage and loyalty, there lay an unspoken desire for glory and recognition? James's popularity and charisma were evident even before the rise of Voldemort's reign of terror. At Hogwarts, he was known for his charm, wit, and his ability to lead his friends. As the captain of the Gryffindor Quidditch team, he was already a figure of admiration and respect. He had the qualities that made him a natural leader: quick thinking, confidence, and a certain magnetic presence that drew people to him. This was a young man who had never lacked attention or praise, but as Voldemort's forces began to gather strength, a new kind of stage emerged, one that promised even greater glory for those brave enough to step forward. It is easy to assume that James Potter joined the Order of the Phoenix purely out of a deep sense of moral duty, as a response to the growing threat posed by Voldemort and his followers. But this view might overlook a more complex motivation: the allure of the war itself. The conflict that ravaged the wizarding world was not only a battle between good and evil, but also an arena in which young men like James could rise to prominence. For someone with his personality, the war may have seemed like a perfect opportunity to further cement his place in history, to achieve a status far beyond the reach of a mere Quidditch captain. James's participation in the war was not just about fighting for survival or defending the innocent. It was also about showing the world, and perhaps even himself, that he was capable of greatness. While many others joined the Order out of a genuine desire to protect their loved ones and their way of life, James may have viewed his involvement as a way to prove that he was, in fact, the best. The war, in his eyes, might have offered more than just danger and loss. It offered the chance for heroism, for fame, and for a recognition that he had long desired. This desire for recognition is not unique to James, of course. Throughout history, there have always been individuals who, driven by a thirst for glory, have participated in great conflicts, not just out of altruism, but also out of a need for self-validation. James, however, was different from many of them. He had the charm, the leadership, and the charisma to inspire others to follow him, qualities that made him a natural leader in the Order of the Phoenix. His friends, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew, admired him deeply. Yet it could be argued that James's role as their leader was also in part a reflection of his own need to stand out. He wanted to be the one who led, who commanded the respect of others, and who proved that he was more than just another student at Hogwarts. In examining James's motivations, we must also consider his relationship with Lily Evans. Their love story is one of the most iconic in the Harry Potter series, but there is a layer to their relationship that speaks to James's desire for validation. Lily was, after all, not immediately impressed by James's charms. She initially saw him as arrogant and immature, and it was only through his growth and change that she began to see him in a different light. James's desire to win her heart may have been rooted not just in love, but also in the need to prove to her and to himself that he was worthy of her affection. This notion of proving himself was further reflected in James's actions during the war. The risks he took, the battles he fought, were not merely about defending the innocent, though that was certainly part of it. They were also about James's desire to show that he was capable of facing the ultimate threat and that he could emerge victorious. The heroism that James exhibited was in many ways a way of proving to the world that he was not just a charming young man, but a leader, a fighter, and a symbol of resistance against the dark forces that threatened the wizarding world. One of the most poignant examples of James's complex motivations can be found in the scene where he and Lily are betrayed by Peter Pettigrew. James's decision to go into hiding to protect his family was undeniably heroic, but it was also a reflection of his role as the ultimate defender of his own legacy. He wanted to ensure that his family, and by extension his reputation, would survive the war. In choosing to hide, James was not just saving Lily and Harry, he was ensuring that his name would not be forgotten. It was a decision born out of both love and a desire to preserve his place in history. James's death, then, takes on a tragic complexity. He died not only as a loving father and husband, but as someone who had participated in the war, not just for selfless reasons, but for a sense of personal glory. His sacrifice, while noble, can also be viewed as a culmination of his need to prove himself. When Voldemort arrived at Godric's Hollow, James fought bravely, but ultimately it was his desire to protect his family, and in some ways his legacy, that drove him to make the ultimate sacrifice. This perspective on James Potter allows us to see him as a more flawed, more human character. He was not the perfect hero that many fans might imagine. Like everyone, he had his own motivations, some of which were deeply personal. His desire for glory and recognition was not the sole reason he joined the Order, but it was certainly a part of it. And in many ways this makes his character more relatable. He was not just a symbol of selflessness, but also a young man grappling with the complexities of his own identity and his place in the world. In contrast to James, we can look at characters like Sirius Black and Remus Lupin, who, while equally brave, did not seek the same level of recognition or fame. Sirius, for instance, joined the Order out of a deep sense of loyalty to his friends and a commitment to fighting for what was right. He did not need to prove himself to anyone. Remus, too, was motivated by a sense of duty, though his personal struggles with being a werewolf may have made him less inclined to seek the spotlight. Both of these characters fought the war for different reasons than James, and their motivations highlight the differences in their approach to heroism. James, despite his flaws, was undeniably a hero in his own right. His actions, his bravery, and his willingness to sacrifice everything for his family and the wizarding world cannot be denied. But by viewing him through a different lens, one that acknowledges his desire for glory and recognition, we gain a deeper understanding of his character. He was not just a hero, he was a man who, like so many others, struggled to reconcile his personal desires with the greater good. In this sense, James Potter is not the flawless hero we often imagine, but a more complex, more relatable figure. One who sought fame, glory, and love, and ultimately found all three, though at a great cost. Number 27, their sacrifice wasn't that unique. The story of Harry Potter begins with the tragic death of his parents, James and Lily Potter, who sacrificed their lives in a heroic act of protection. Their deaths have been immortalized in the wizarding world as the ultimate sacrifice, the catalyst for Harry's survival against the dark magic of Voldemort. But if we look at their story from a different angle, their sacrifice might not seem as exceptional as it appears. After all, the wizarding world was not without its own set of tragedies, and thousands of witches and wizards perished In the war against Voldemort, many of these deaths were equally, if not more, heartbreaking, but they remain nameless, their stories untold. Why then did James and Lily's deaths become a legend? In the wizarding world, the narrative of James and Lily's sacrifice is often framed as a myth, one that has become central to the entire saga. It is easy to be swept away by the emotional weight of their deaths. They were young, talented, and beautiful. They were brave in the face of evil, willing to die for their son. But when we remove the emotion and look at the facts, we realize that their deaths were not unique. They were just two more casualties in a long list of victims of a brutal war. The idea that their deaths were somehow exceptional stems not from the tragedy itself, but from the story that was built around it. One key reason James and Lily's sacrifice is often elevated above others is because of the miraculous survival of their son Harry. The story of Harry's survival is what makes their deaths legendary. The chosen one, the boy who lived, carries the weight of their sacrifice on his shoulders. Without Harry's survival, their deaths would have remained just another sorrowful chapter in the history of the war. But Harry's survival, the fact that the curse intended to kill him was somehow deflected, turned their death into something extraordinary. It became a defining moment in the battle between good and evil, a symbol of hope for the wizarding world. But this view of James and Lily as martyrs only holds up when we focus on Harry's survival and the impact it had on the greater story. When we stop to think about it, there were many other parents who died in a similar way, protecting their children. The Longbottoms, for instance, Alice and Frank Longbottom, suffered a tragic fate at the hands of Bellatrix Lestrange and other Death Eaters. They were tortured into insanity, their lives destroyed, their legacy forgotten. Their son, Neville, was left with the scars of their suffering, but unlike Harry, he did not carry the same weight of his parents' sacrifice on his shoulders. The Longbottoms were brave, just as James and Lily were, yet their story does not hold the same mythic status. Their deaths did not bring about a dramatic change in the world. Their sacrifice was no less noble, but it went unnoticed by history. And then there are the countless other unnamed victims of the war who fought and died in obscurity. Witches and wizards who stood up to Voldemort and his followers, whose names were never written in history books or commemorated in memorials. These individuals died without fanfare, their families left to mourn in private. For every hero like James and Lily, there were hundreds of others whose lives were lost in the battle against the dark forces, their deaths no less heroic or tragic, but equally forgotten. One might argue that James and Lily's sacrifice was exceptional because they were prominent members of the wizarding community known for their involvement in the Order of the Phoenix. They were well-known figures, respected and admired for their bravery in the fight against Voldemort. Their deaths had an immediate impact on the war effort, rallying others to the cause. But even this argument does not entirely hold up. Other members of the Order, such as Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and even Arthur Weasley, played crucial roles in the battle against Voldemort, yet their stories are far less celebrated. They too suffered and sacrificed in the name of fighting evil, but their deaths did not lead to a prophecy or result in the survival of a child who would go on to defeat Voldemort. The narrative of James and Lily's deaths as a defining moment in the saga is not based on the magnitude of their sacrifice, but on the circumstances surrounding Harry's survival and the greater prophecy that followed. It is also important to remember that at the time of their deaths, James and Lily were not fighting alone. They were part of a generation that had already endured a long and bloody war. They were just one pair of parents who, like so many others, had been forced to make a choice between their lives and the lives of their children. They made the ultimate sacrifice, but they were not the only ones. Thousands of other parents made similar choices, choosing to protect their families at all costs. James and Lily were just the ones whose story was told, their death framed in a way that turned it into a myth. The world needed a hero, and Harry became the symbol of that hope. His survival, the mark of his mother's love, transformed his parents' deaths into a story that would be remembered for generations to come. Moreover, the focus on their sacrifice can also overshadow the larger picture of the war itself. The Wizarding War was not a battle fought by a few, but a worldwide conflict that affected millions. Families were torn apart, lives were lost, and entire communities were displaced. Yet, the focus of the story has always been on James and Lily, their deaths serving as the emotional cornerstone of the Harry Potter saga. But if we widen our lens and look at the broader impact of the war, we see that James and Lily's deaths were just a small part of a much larger tragedy. The war had far-reaching consequences for the wizarding world, and countless other families were affected in ways that were just as devastating, if not more so. One could argue that the legend of James and Lily Potter has been carefully constructed over time. Their sacrifice, their love, and the survival of their son were woven into the tapestry of the wizarding world, creating a narrative that is not entirely based on the reality of their deaths, but on the myth that has grown around them. The fact that their story has been told over and over again from Harry's perspective has only solidified their place in the annals of history. The narrative of their sacrifice has become so ingrained in the fabric of the wizarding world that it is almost impossible to imagine it any other way. But when we step back and look at their deaths from a more detached perspective, we begin to see that their sacrifice, while undeniably tragic, was not unique. Their story is one of many in a world torn apart by war, a story that has been immortalized because of the miraculous survival of their son and the prophecy that surrounded him. James and Lily were not the only ones who died for a cause, and their deaths did not bring about the end of the war or the defeat of Voldemort. Their sacrifice, like those of so many others, was simply one more chapter in the long and painful history of the wizarding world's fight against evil. In the end, the myth of the one great sacrifice is a comforting story, a narrative that allows us to remember James and Lily Potter as the heroes they were. But it is also a story that simplifies the complexity of the war, a story that elevates their deaths above the countless others who perished in the fight against Voldemort. The truth, however, is that their sacrifice was no more exceptional than that of the countless others who fought and died in obscurity. The story of Harry Potter is built on the foundation of their sacrifice, but it is also a story that could have been told in countless other ways with countless other heroes.